Hi everyone, my name is Gurney. My partner Neha and I will be talking about the concept of food festivals in order to explain the differences and similarities between the city of Toronto and New York City. We will analyze Toronto and New York City into depth to explain the reasons why certain food festivals are situated in different regions within each city. We will also be examining the 6 factors: requirement of admissions, affordability, family appropriateness, authenticity, ethnic speciality, and entertainment that are involved in determining the success of each food festival within a specific population in the city of Toronto versus New York City. We will also be examining the reasons why some food festivals in the same spatial areas within a city have different success outcomes, as well as a comparison across the spatial areas of New York City and Toronto.
The thesis of our research is to question whether there are differences in food festivals between New York versus Toronto, and also to see the success and growth rates between each city's food festivals. When we started our project, we looked at for many different types of food festivals all over both cities, whether they were in the suburbs or right in the downtown core. We found a lot of food festivals to be situated right in the downtown core for Manhattan in New York City, with about a few that were scattered across the other boroughs of New York City. But when looking at Toronto, the same type of cluster effect was not as common. The city of Toronto is potentially the dynamic economic heart of the country. It has many assets, including a well-educated population, critical mass of firms with a unique mix of products and services, a well-diversified economy with a solid base of economic clusters. The food and beverage cluster is the third largest in North America. It employs more than 59,000 people and had sales of about $17 billion in 2010. So both Toronto and Manhattan are home to a very culturally diverse demographic, with immigrants from all over the globe and many different continents. So this is why we were interested in looking at Toronto and Manhattan, because they were cities that we knew we could compare because of their demographic and their cultural diverseness. So we find it interesting that, with that being said, most New York City festivals happen in the downtown core, which is Manhattan, where the demographics and percentage of minorities or immigrants permanently living in the spatial distance is only around 16%. The rest of the visible minority and immigrants live and work elsewhere, with 1 million out of 3 million living in Brooklyn, which is outside of Manhattan. Not to mention that the demographic that does live in Manhattan is super rich, privileged, and living off of heaps of money. Another important thing to note is that these people who live in Manhattan are mostly single, childless adults of all ages who have time on their hands and the money to go out and enjoy these food festivals and take in what they have to offer from time to time. This demographic scene looks more like perfect audience mixed with critical mass. Because these food festivals are tailoring up right after each other in several parts of Manhattan and just in the vicinities mostly of the city. And Manhattan does have a perfect audience, with most of its residents single, who have the time and resources to go out and spend on different foods of different cultures and backgrounds. So connecting a similar reading by Parks for Profit, we see that the article, the city investors in New York City are looking to expand even public spaces for profit and have private properties built around the park, or have the park shaped as a place for the elite. This park is called the High Line Park, and it is also in Manhattan. This plays a big role in our research because it shows us that there might be a distinct correlation to the building of the park and the surrounding food festivals. Proximity between the park and the food festivals that take place around it. We question if there could be a close relationship between investors and planners to have festivals around this area to create attraction to the park. In Toronto, we see it growing to be a global city within a city of neighborhoods. With that being said, our research shows that even the addresses chosen for the food festivals, some of them are specifically located to map out how most locals can come there and enjoy the festivals. Although this is not 100% the only intention Toronto goes with, there are many food festivals that it holds that are close to the harbour front. We know that over post-industrial years, Toronto has been working with ways to develop its waterfront and ways to attract investors, ways to make it well known and give competition to other cities, such as New York City, which already has a booming recognition of the world scale and is known as a global city. One of the many examples of Toronto holding a festival in the harbourfront area is the Vegan Food Festival and the Vegetarian Food Festival. When it comes to branding, neither Toronto nor New York City have backed down. As a cultural and creative city, both of them have tried their best to include every type of food scene. From Asian festivals to Indian festivals, you name it, both cities will have it. New York City, for example, having festivals like Little Italy festivals, to the Festival of Jamaican Jerk Festival, and Toronto having the Halal Food Festival, also the Little Italy Food Festival, and Taste of Asia. For both cities, there's a high observation for ethnic food festivals to be in a specific area where the population of that race, ethnicity, background exists. We think that this is a super important part of strategic planning and also using demographics and space to take an advantage of where more money will be generated by locals themselves. Basically targeting areas like the Taste of Asia is in a densely Asian populated neighborhood of Scarborough and Toronto proves to show that some festivals that are run just for local word of mouth, and to show that these cities do give great importance to culture. Social ecology is also very important when looking at these two differences, but what we also looked at was what type of transportation systems were readily available for festival goers to get in and out of the festival. Another main driving factor was that in Toronto there were countless ways to get to the food festival with public transportation, and in New York there were also ways to get there by public transportation, or some people in Manhattan already had cars where they could get to the festivals without any problems. Although we started off our thesis with just observing the differences between food festivals, we also tried to look at the success rates between the two food festivals, and we based these on many different factors, which we will talk about in the next slide. So for our sociological literature, we used two main readings. One was Patterson and Silver's reading, and the other one was just Patterson. So for Patterson and Silver's readings, we talked about how there is a critical mass and perfect audience present in both Manhattan and New York City. Although we do say that they are present in both cities, we think that there is more of one of those in one city and one of the other ones in another city. So what we mean by critical mass is that Patterson and Silver said that arts growth will grow in districts where there's already arts growing. So this is what we're going to be using most for hypothesizing why there are so many clusters of food festivals in the downtown core of Manhattan. And we're going to be using this theory to figure out whether there is a type of critical mass there present. And then for Toronto, we're going to be using the perfect audience theory, because perfect audience talks about how arts growth will happen in places where there's a need, or where there's an audience, or there's interest in that area for the art to be available and to be viewed. And in that way, we do mention that Toronto is a city of neighborhoods, which has to do with the second reading. So city of neighborhoods basically means that Toronto is a city within different neighborhoods, and those different neighborhoods have different ethnic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds. So we see this a lot in Toronto, and so we want to hypothesize that Toronto will have their food festivals spread out mostly because of this perfect audience, where for example, Mississauga, there is the Halal Food Festival, and the Halal Food Festival is catering more towards people who have religious dietary restrictions, and it tells them that they can have halal food instead of having to go around looking for places that are halal. This happens in Mississauga because there's a lot of population where there's Muslims and South Asians and other people who have the same kind of dietary problems. So that's another way where we can look at how Toronto tries to accommodate their festivals based on where there's more interest for them. So for example, there's another festival that happens in Scarborough, which is the Taste of South Asia, and that is also because there's a lot of South Asians there, and those South Asians will benefit, and they're the perfect audience for that type of festival. So that's why we use the two main theories, perfect audience and critical mass. We do talk about social ecology as well, and how it's very important to have to notice what kind of places are in what area and what's around them, so that people can have a chance to be accessible to them. And we also look at how the success and the growth depends on certain factors. So the factors that we wanted to see affect the success of each city's festivals are accessibility. We wanted to look at family appropriateness. We wanted to look at affordability and just in general how successful it is in the long run. So we also look at how these food festivals that are in different cities, how their success grows and how it affects each other. So if there's so in Manhattan, for example, when there's clusters of food festivals, how does the success differ in those clusters versus in the areas of Toronto, and which food festival city has the greatest level of success? So we do this by looking at those factors that we talked about earlier, and those are the main sociological literature points that we will be looking at. And our main hypothesis is that we hypothesize that because New York City is a global city, it will have mostly everything in the downtown core, which is Manhattan, because that is the most popular area of New York City, and they go by critical mass, and Toronto goes by perfect audience because it is a city of neighborhoods. And then we would also like to expand by asking ourselves how the growth differs in both cities and how the success growth changes, and we do this by looking at the factors of accessibility, affordability, family appropriateness, and the overall success and growth of the festivals in the past.
So for our methods, we used a sample where we used sources like Google, Yelp, and countless tourism blogs. We also used keyword searches, which were food festivals, New York City, and Toronto. Food festivals was defined as an annually held festival that used as a way to unite communities, specifically through various food items across cultures. We did point of comparison between Toronto and New York City, where we divided Toronto into different regions and New York City into different boroughs. We wanted to see what kind of food festivals the city had to offer and which regions or boroughs they were located around, specifically the downtown core, or if they were spread out across the city. This was just a way for us to organize the locations to which the food festivals were situated around. So we used coding terms based on spatial distribution, which were color categorization. So peach represented authentic cultural cuisines, which we coded for any food festival that involved representation of foods originating from countries outside of North and South America with various authentic cultural background. Pink represented drink festivals, which we coded for any food festival that involves the advertisement of alcoholic beverages. Red represented combination of foods, which we coded as any food festival that involves a variety of different foods combined to one festival. Gray represented truck festivals, which we coded for any food festival that displayed their food through various food trucks during any time of the season. Green represented vegan, vegetarian festivals, which we coded for any food festival that prohibited recipes which included meat. Blue represented non-vegetarian festivals, which we coded for any foods festivals that were strictly focused on recipes that involved certain types of meat. The second point of comparison that we had between Toronto and New York City was coding terms for the 6 factors that account for the success of food festivals, which include requirement of admissions. It was based on whether or not the food festivals require a fee to enter, which depended on the success of the food festival, because even if the individuals are not particularly interested in a specific food festival, they still may choose to check it out because of the fact that there's nothing to lose in terms of monetary value. Affordability was another factor, which we examined through price points of each food festival to determine the success of the food festivals. Another factor was family appropriateness, which we examined whether or not the food festivals were designed for single adults or adults with children. So depending on either one of the categories, we want to figure out which one was more successful. Another factor was entertainment, which was coded through food festivals that involve sports, art shows, movies, performances, and dances. This type of entertainment is a way to urge more people to attend the food festivals, so we wanted to see if this was true in determining the success of food festivals in New York City and Toronto. Lastly, there are two factors that go hand in hand, which is authenticity and ethnic speciality. These terms were quoted to find food festivals with foods that are hard to find or have a unique twist to them, or those that are specific to certain cultures or backgrounds. We coded these two terms the same way because those foods that are ethnically specific are still authentic to people who are not from that ethnicity, and vice versa. So these factors play an important role in determining one's decision on why certain individuals in the city choose to participate in certain food festivals, which results in the reasons why they're positioned closer to some individuals than others. The findings for spatial distribution of food festivals in Toronto were that the food festivals were more diversely spread out, although centered within the downtown core of Toronto, which matched our hypothesis. And although other food festivals are located elsewhere, specifically in the region of Mississauga, which was like the Halal Food Fest, this could be explained through the higher South Asian population residing in Mississauga as partaking in developing food for its community. So we found that food festivals are developed based on heritage or nationality, where the Rib Fest in Toronto is unique to Toronto's heritage, while New York City serves very minimum recognition in meat festivals. The findings for spatial distribution of food festivals in New York City was that the food festivals are mainly centered towards one specific borough of New York City, which was Manhattan. But generally, the similarities and differences between the food festivals in New York City and Toronto was that there was a taste of Italy that happened in Toronto as well as New York City, which was similarities. The differences was that New York City had a lot of seafood festivals, whereas Toronto had a lot of vegan and vegetarian food festivals. And also, there weren't a lot of kid-friendly food festivals in New York City, but there were many in Toronto. So that suggests that there's a lot of family appropriateness in food festivals in Toronto, as well as because there's also film food festivals that happen in Toronto, whereas New York City had more of like alcoholic drinks at their food festival. So for the findings of the 6 factors that account for the success of food festivals within Toronto versus New York City, we randomly selected 10 food festivals from each city from the total of 50. We then looked for key terms that fell under each category of factors that account for the success of food festivals in the chart below. We used a category of good and poor. Good got a score of 1 if it fell under 5 out of 10 of the factors, and poor got a score of 0 if it fell under 4 out of 10 of the factors. In the end, we calculated the score to see which city is more or less succeeding based on our coding. So, as results show, we found that New York City had a score of 1 for entertainment, and Toronto had a score of 1 for family appropriateness. However, Toronto outscores New York City in requirement of admissions and affordability through our coding. And we found that New York City had a score of 0 for affordability. This score is explained through individuals who live in a high-status neighborhood who are able to pay for this food festival, whereas others from a lower socioeconomic status cannot pay or afford these food festivals, since these expensive food festivals are not affordable for everyone.
In conclusion, we'd like to restate our hypothesis and research question, which was trying to figure out the similarities and differences between New York City and Toronto food festivals, trying to apply the theories of critical mass, perfect audience, global cities, and city of neighborhoods into our approach, and also trying to figure out the success rate of food festivals in both cities based on certain factors. So we discussed 6 factors in our research report. We also discussed how Toronto is seen as a city of neighborhoods versus how New York City is seen as a city that is a global city. And so we conducted a study with mapping a comparative analysis between food festivals in New York City and Toronto. We looked at different criterias and we coded different food festivals based on different categories. We also found that there are very much similarities and differences between food festivals.
In conclusion, although there is a whole diversity of food festivals within the city of Toronto and New York City, there should be more awareness about them in order to attract population within the city as well as outside of the city. We found that food festivals attract those that are interested in a specific type of food. Therefore, there are many other factors involved independent of an individual's race. For further research, there should be coding done about the factor of sponsorship and profit that's put forth towards charitable causes being involved in the food festival to discover whether Toronto or New York City has low, high, or no level of social security. Profit and charity could fall under one of the 6 factors discussed in this project, which is affordability, because individuals may choose food festivals that are more or less expensive depending on where their money goes towards in the end.